The Ghent altarpiece is a complex work of art. It was made over the course of around 8 years and is primarily attributed to master painter Jan van Eyck. It's been housed inside St Bavo's Cathedral for almost 600 years, and it remains one of the most incredible artistic feats ever manifested. It's a piece of such monumental achievement that I can't adequately express what I feel when I see it. When the altarpiece panels are closed, it's apexed by prophets and angels, looking down on the Annunciation of the Virgin Mary. Beneath her are vertical registers of the donors, acting as flanks towards the central saints. And when opened, there are 12 separate panels. At the top sits a trinity of heavenly throned figures, the Virgin Mary, John the Baptist, and the Almighty, composed within a golden halo. Adam and Eve stand as primal guardians on the extremes of the polyptych. The intricate level of detail displays Adam's toe raised, as if to step outside the boundaries of the altar itself and into our world. And then there's the central piece, the Adoration of the Mystic Lamb, a painting saturated with symbology that speaks of humanity's complete reverence towards all that we possess as sacred knowledge, as the crowds collapse to their knees in worship of this stoic and bloody offering. Although erroneously attributed to being the first major oil painting, the importance of the Ghent altarpiece is like a bridging of the gap between a medieval world and a new expansive age that we would come to know as the Renaissance. It's a transcendental ode to the talent of humans, as well as a symbolic tome that will communicate some innate knowledge to the rest of humanity for all eternity. Pink Flamingos by John Waters ends with an obese transvestite eating dog feces off of a street in Baltimore. Now, although I prefer one of these art pieces to the other, I still enjoy the two of them, and I will fight that the world needs both. Happy birthday to us. It's been 10 years since the inception of this channel. Remember when it was called Channel Criswell? It's been very fun, and with it I've noticed a lot of changes occur in this last decade. What changes, I hear you say? Well, it feels to me, as the person behind these pieces, that I get a decent idea of general audience perceptions because our work gives us a lot of them. And within our brief period of activity, I can say audiences in general have changed. They've become a bit more absolutist. They don't seem to possess as much joy of discovery. They just don't seem to enjoy things as much anymore. And my fear is that audiences are finding ways to segment themselves and are becoming more and more close-minded and cynical. Our goal has always been the same as it is now, to instigate some deep or meaningful level of discourse about the art that we enjoy. That meant that we could talk about anything and anyone, and it never mattered where it came from. But now it does, and now that means something. Okay, but why? Because over the last 10 years, we've attempted to speak on the transcendental, the importance of image and literary literacy. We've, controversially, asked for standards in the arts, and for people to know its history. We've exposed people to the communist propaganda of the Soviet film school, the Marxist leanings of the French New Wave, the Catholic orthodoxy of Andrei Tarkovsky, the perverted cinema of Sion Sono, the humanism of John Ford, the provocations of Lars von Trier, the feminism of Agnes Varda, just to name a few. And so I'm telling you, it's been vital in our artistic journey to expose ourselves and be open to as much as possible. And even after all the work that we've done, I can clearly see that there's just some innate barrier to people being open-minded, that some of these perspectives and pieces of art may contradict one another. But have we really hit the point that we have to agree with everything something stands for just to enjoy it? The fact is, as humans, we want to categorize things. I understand that. I probably identify with that. I like knowing where a thing sits, just to have a general overview of what it is and what it represents. However, I don't think that's what's happening. The common practice that seems to emerge when examining any form of art is that it's simplified toward a lowest common denominator in easy to digest sound bites and labels so that people don't have to actively engage with the art on any kind of meaningful level to know exactly what it is. Brat is the anthem of a generation. Joker Folie deux is a failure of cinema. Not to say that you can't believe these things, or that there may even be a modicum of truth in widespread opinions. However, my sincere belief is that whether it's a genre of art you don't enjoy, whether it's a political or social view you rally against, whether it's just someone you don't like personally, it appears to me that these broad brushstrokes are emerging due to some innate fear of people committing to challenging their views. People don't like to hear this, but if you don't like me saying it, then take Ethel Cain speaking of the inability of her own fans to approach her art with sincerity, or Martin Scorsese speaking of the mindless creation of content swamping all artistic integrity. I'm not the first one to point out that we are in an epoch of mindless acceptance, and anyone who speaks out against it is perceived as someone crying for authoritarian rule. Either that, or they're just out of touch. Ultimately, art resonates with us because it makes us feel things. But when was the last time you had a sincere, face-to-face conversation with someone about how a piece of art made you feel, about how you grew from it? Because I can watch the film Her, and rather than saying what it meant to me, I'll leave a snarky one-line lowercase review that serves to fuel my social status instead. That'll separate me from the rest of the crowd. Look, in this little thing that we do, we've been granted a variety of categorizations ourselves. One as a championing voice for the arts, or as a helping hand in its grand conversation. We've also been granted the moniker of elitist, pretentious, or fascist. I think this kind of obsessive categorization and extreme compartmentalizing occurs for the same reasons that people would be confused as to why I'm beginning this video by talking about the Ghent altarpiece and Pink Flamingos in the same vein as one another. But ultimately, it can all be explained in a single sentence. And though what I'm about to say might seem completely unrelated, I believe, or more so I'm completely confident, that the reason that the arts are becoming diluted, that people's taste is becoming so uniform, that people struggle to venture into any area they find uncomfortable, that people are so antagonistic towards views that they don't share, is simple. Nothing is punk anymore. This is filmmaker Pier Paolo Pasolini. This is an image of him in an altercation with a member of the Italian Fascist Party. Most people know him for making Salo, the film with the infamous reputation of the most disturbing film ever made, in which we see a group of aristocrats abuse children in the most horrifically violent ways imaginable, putting them through endless and heinous torture. There are many people that think of this work as depraved from the mind of an undesirable. It's shocking, disgusting, a personal favourite, and can appear to possess a fatalistic view of the human species. A few years prior to this, Pasolini made The Gospel According to St. Matthew, in which, with complete reverence, he tells the story of Jesus from birth to resurrection. Pasolini leant more towards atheism, and yet had a complete admiration and even nostalgia for religious belief. The man who made the most disturbing film ever also had the same sentimentality to create what the Vatican referred to as the best film ever made about Christ. There was a show years ago on the BBC about Sister Wendy Beckett. Wendy Beckett was a nun who developed a keen fascination with the world of art. Her initial vocation was that she would translate medieval Latin scripts, but later she decided that she was to pursue this other burgeoning passion of hers. And of all forms of art one would anticipate her to write about, she wrote a book on contemporary female artists, with a perspective that was as open and insightful as one would expect of any great art critic. She didn't shy away from any artwork, even those that would have been considered profane. I remember she vocalised a very unique and interesting take on Piss Christ, which is essentially the seminal piece of art that the religious and conservatives point towards as, see, here is everything wrong with modern art. And here, you have this cloistered nun that's utterly open-minded to it and even offers understanding. And not only was she able to do this, she did the same with art of antiquity, of the Renaissance, of modernism. And in turn, she created a show that exposed thousands to the love of all art. She held steadfast to her faith her entire life, but was able to venture into the world of art, completely liberated by any notions of a restricting belief. It's the same when I see someone like Susan Sontag. She wrote about anything she wanted: literature, sex, war, photography. Spike Jonze has made some heartfelt and transgressive works like Her and Where the Wild Things Are, and then he's hanging out with the Jackass crew, funding their antics. I like people like Christopher Hitchens. I like Camille Paglia.
These people in the who have control of the university's humanities departments now do not believe in great art. Okay, they do not. They believe the dead white European males are just have been canonized.
The constant balancing acts of polymaths, when what many would say appear as their contradictions, are actually their greatest strengths.
Of the Italian church. I think that it's a very powerful. Madonna and I, the two biggest influences on us were Italian Catholicism and gay men. Gay men have been enormously influential in forming my sensibility.
Camille Paglia understands the here and now as much as she understands the great tradition, and you can't fully criticise or compliment either if you don't understand its adverse. You must gather the information of the history of mankind while keeping your thumb on its quickening pulse. A thinker like Slavoj Žižek epitomizes this understanding that human behaviour and ideology are intertwined in a person as much as one's environment is, and thus strong belief systems have the ability to play out within pop culture.
I want to give you my last example of this divine obscenity, this living God returning. Now we will see if you manage it. Gangnam Style.
Werner Herzog is someone that has such a unique perspective on mankind precisely because of this balance. He speaks of hyper-contemporary culture as one would its greatest bastions, talking with keen excitement about something like WrestleMania.
That there was some sort of a new image, a new prototype of so-called beauty out there, a comic strip beauty, in utter vulgarity and in complete deformities.
These artists and thinkers embody a punk mentality. They get it. They understand humanity on a rich level, and even in work that appears horrific, something still resonates. I brought up Pink Flamingos at the beginning because, again, it's an archetype of extreme categorizations. Anytime the concept is brought up that we can actually aim to be transgressive or even more vulgar in art, people jump to the extreme end and think that it's a rallying cry to a complete collapse of any value system. I'm someone that deeply cares about traditional values and integrity, but come on, is there no room for fun or something daring? Have you not read Oscar Wilde before? Because many people would look at Pink Flamingos and think of it as a degenerate work. And truthfully, anyone who thinks so might be a little square. John Waters is a director who's unapologetically himself, crass, disgusting, and camp. He's never thought of his artwork as a movement or of some great bastion of representation. He wanted his group of weirdos to make a film to shock the world. But the difference is, even with this perspective, John Waters, when he speaks, loves the great tradition of art. He gets it.
I know bad taste, but to know bad taste, you have to know all the rules of good taste, which my parents painstakingly taught me. That's probably why I rebelled. I was almost fascistly good taste I was raised with. But I'm thankful for it, actually, because you can't have fun with bad taste unless you know how to break you know the rules to break.
And just because I'll defend and thoroughly enjoy Pink Flamingos doesn't mean that degenerate pieces of art don't exist. We should still celebrate the works of art that hold humanism on a pedestal. The work of Ozu and Michelangelo can realign humanity on a beautifying path. The difference is that John Waters and Pasolini and countless other artists get this. They get the thing that so many people don't. And this is what I want, and this is what we've been championing for, but it looks as though we may have to rethink our approach, because I perhaps naively anticipated that this kind of open-mindedness would be flourishing. The idea was that the internet would provide this, but it's such an illusion, because everything became so commodified and branded that if you are to step outside those set boundaries or cross into enemy territory with your beliefs, people aren't ready for it. They want your thing to be something categorizable, whether it's a formula to your content, you becoming your brand, whatever it is. I'm just done with pigeonholing everything. I mean, I have to continue to make video essays about cinema in a very specific way because that's the expectation. And if I go outside of my assigned role, then I'm not in my own lane. Fuck that, I'm done with it. Because something needs to instigate a change. Who knows? Maybe it's us. Now, what I'm supposed to have done by now as a video essay is to have broken down the history of punk by putting the early years Wikipedia tab into ChatGPT, but I don't think I'm going to do that. Look, you know what I mean when I say something's punk, and if you don't, I trust you enough that you'll figure it out. But we're going to do something first. Something about how we can look at the arts with respect for its tradition and excitement for its future. Whether we like it or not, whether we even agree with it or not, there is a kind of hierarchy of the arts of what we deem as high art and low art. It would look something like this, and obviously there's room to move some about or swap places with a few. Now disregard what you feel about this for a moment, and let's just look at it. I think we can agree that this is generally how the world of art establishes its hierarchy, give or take. A sculptor is rarely going to consider the medium of comic books on their same level. But even adversely, someone that creates pop music is likely to consider classical music as elitist or snobbish. This isn't exclusively a top-down view, but I think that we can alter these basic perceptions and allow people to have a broader view of the art world. And the solution's rather simple. Rather than viewing the scale vertically, we can simply view it horizontally. Because I firmly believe I've encountered enough art across these mediums that there is potential for each one to transcend beyond its medium and create a universally lauded piece. Now don't jump to the conclusions and run off the fucking deep end saying that graffiti and oil painting are then just innately as good as one another. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is the hierarchy should exist, but within the individual mediums. Every form has an opportunity to reach its apex and communicate to the viewer or the reader some deeply resonant theme. I believe that the greatest graffiti art, or video game, or poem can reach the highest of the highs in the arts. But this is not to say that it's just enough to read comic books or watch anime, and that will fill you with sufficient knowledge about the arts. There still is some degree of canon within all of these mediums. Reading through empty serialized superhero stories is not the same as reading Berserk, just as playing annual multiple sports releases does not give you as much insight as playing a Disco Elysium or a Planescape Torment. Now, an immediate reaction to this is often that what I'm suggesting is a restrictive perspective that encourages exclusive engagement with boring, quote, non-transgressive mediums. No, that's not it. You should listen to classical music, but there is still shit classical music, and there are pop songs that offer more than some classical compositions. Is it likelier that the virtuosity and skill required to make classical music increases the chances that it will be more artistically valuable? Yes. And we should stop wasting time pretending that it doesn't. But the point I'm actually making is engage with as much as possible, but you have to engage with the best, because when you don't, you only partake in a fraction of the human experience, and you reduce your knowledge of that you already know less of. The fact is, artists and lovers of art should understand the arts, but very few do. Very rarely does an Alan Moore or a Guillermo del Toro or a Hideo Kojima or an Alejandro Jodorowsky emerge that can maneuver through multiple mediums, or at the very least have a respect that emerges throughout them. Many artists and consumers of art have a block when it comes to certain art forms. They just don't know anything about them. People on one end of a spectrum rarely understand their polar opposite. Those fascinated by religious art very rarely can adequately understand the postmodern, and the hyper-contemporary very often perceive transcendental art as archaic and unnecessary. My biggest struggle is that these polarities should exist, but the place in which the most complete human being resides in is the overlapping centre of this Venn diagram, an overlap which is shrinking with every passing second. Nothing is punk anymore, because being punk is a matter of strength, to not only speak against what you don't believe, but to speak for the things that you do. And what could be a stronger attribute for a person than a complete absorption and deep understanding of the human condition, that you have the capacity to speak for almost every one of its aspects. Because that spirit that allowed John Waters to make Pink Flamingos is the same that allowed Jan van Eyck to paint the Ghent altarpiece. If people want to be punk, it's about being a complete human being that can navigate all of humanity, from the heights of virtuosity to the depths of debasement, and still emerge with one's values at the forefront. At some point, for some reason, there emerged the idea that our perspective of championing the greatness of art and the traditions of art in some circles meant we all of a sudden became out of touch with the here and the now and the real transgressive movements. This is the least punk thing I could imagine someone saying. Just because I'm in awe of the work of Hieronymus Bosch and probably spend a silly amount of money on books about him, does that mean I also shouldn't own the complete DVD collection of Dirty Sanchez, a show which I'm not afraid to say influenced me and my friends to do some of the most life-endangering stunts for a laugh?
I missed! Bollocks! You didn't fucking miss, did you? Chip my head off!
I'm an artist. I make art, and my perspective is that of a pop culture junkie. I've been exposed to fine art and to the internet and television and video games, and this is the canvas of inspiration that all my things have been splattered upon. Just because something represents something, whether it's religious, political, neither makes it transgressive, nor representational, nor good. It's on an individual metric that we need to look at these things in context. And someone whose lens of the arts is narrowed down to one medium, or art made in a specific vein, is not a complete human being. I'm not particularly bothered about the ideas of someone whose work is only about speaking goodness of traditional values as much as I am about those who only want to dwell in the cynical realm of human nature. Absolutely, I believe that the former would be far less damaging. However, the human being is about balance, and too often am I seeing people stay in their bubbles, incapable or unwilling to speak, to engage with that side of them that they resent or fear. I've always said that one of my favourite aspects about Lars von Trier is that in some macabre manner, he will attempt to make the viewer empathise or recognise a reciprocation in his most abhorrent of figures. Because that's life. It's complex. But we can, as long as we're present within ourselves, traverse through it.
I'm sorry. Were you offended that I called you a serial killer?
No.
But now comes the other part I want to speak about. There's going to be many people that hear all of this and say, yeah, I do all that. I know Louise Bourgeois and fucking The Weeknd. I am liberated in the arts. That's good. But are you really? Can you really traverse it? Could you, for example, watch La Chinoise and then Gone with the Wind and approach them like normal without flipping out? I don't get surprised a lot. I think I'm old enough and aware enough to have a good idea at how things play out. I know that a new social media will come out at some point and people won't have learnt their lessons from the previous one, so they'll jump on it. I know that people will give attention to influencers they hate, commit acts they find perverse, so that they can achieve stratospheric amounts of money, widening the gap between normalcy and a new class of uber wealth. None of these simulacras take me by surprise anymore. But what does surprise me is the lack of dissent. What does surprise me is how hard it is to find people that get it. People that have that angst or that edge to them. People that are lost in the world of Tarkovsky and at the same time can revel in the overt offensiveness of a Drawn Together. It really just stopped at one point. This energy to be offensive or anarchic. And I can't help but feel that this is somewhat related to this inability to separate not only artists from the artwork, but one's own perceptions in the eyes of the artist. That people became so irrational, they began to believe art was specifically, personally, attacking them. I mentioned Susan Sontag as an inspiration earlier. You know that Susan Sontag has an essay about the white race as a cancer. I don't agree with it, but I'm open to hear a great mind express it, just as I'm open to see a great artist create the birth of a nation because it's an aesthetic achievement. But you say any of this stuff and people get scared to death. What the fuck happened? I thought that the arts were boundary pushing. I'm tired of people approaching all discourse in this weird combination of their own hatred and their monotony. Remember, the most dangerous people in the world are the humorless. I mean, it's everything though. Look at the state comedy is in. Comedy is rarely seen as an art form. But you know how I know it is? Ask someone to tell you a joke and measure its success by the deafening silence that follows it. This is just a personal tangent because this upsets me to no end. Like, comedy now is either this postmodern deconstruction of joke telling, or it's someone explaining how their free speech is taken away under the guise of biting social commentary. If I were to use a word to describe both these types of edge, I would use the word blunted. Comedians, great comedians, used to just be naturally transgressive by being funny. That was what they represented in society, to be able to bring an awareness that we all know, an aggressive exposure of truth. Who cares if you agreed with everything they said? Just laugh at the joke.
No, she turned her back. The little boy took the chocolate, rubbed it on his face. Look, Mommy, I'm black. She slapped the shit out of him. Go tell your father what you did. Look, Daddy, I'm black. He took that belt off and beat his ass. Go tell your grandfather. Look, Grandpa, I'm black. He took a switch out and beat his ass. Now go back to your mama. Go back to his mother. Mother said, now what did you learn today? He said, I learned that I've been black for 5 minutes and already I hate you white motherfuckers. It's only a joke. It's only a fucking joke. Don't get fucking carried away.
Like, why are people becoming personally attacked by something, even if it does affect them? Just be a human. But no, we have to take it to theoretical terms to fully comprehend its social effects. Okay, fine. Then is this not just Aristotle's catharsis, the release of dramatic tension through recognition? We recognise what's being said. We may not like it, but where lieth the issue?
And none of you know what funny is. Like the doctor.
Was that fun? Was it funny? What I
to say
funny to me?
Nappy-headed hoe
was it funny?
Is hilarious.
I mean, to be honest, this is now just an excuse to play my favourite comedians to prove a point about how people that just get it can be funny and insightful, and that gives you an actual edge. And if you don't get this, it's not my job to try and coerce you into getting it. If you find the idea of laughing at something you find offensive or disagreeable wrong, then your soul is fucked up. But I do hope you can find it again.
Were you in New York when the Twin Towers fell?
No, I was in Los Angeles.
Well, either way, it was a national tragedy. It was.
Yeah, I know.
9/11.
Can you imagine the equivalent of what Orson Welles represented in cinema and what Hemingway represented in literature if they, today, told this story about their meeting?
And I said, is it really necessary to say this? Do you think wouldn't it be better to just see the picture and things like that? And then I heard this growl from the darkness, you know? Some damn faggot who runs an art theater trying to tell me how to write narration and so on. So I began to camp it up. I thought, if that's what I'm dealing with, I said, oh, Mr. Hemingway, you think because you're so big and strong and have hair on your chest that you got to bully me, you see?
We're too removed from any of the endearing qualities of the edge that people possess. We're determined to find a discrediting facet to a person that dares to go against the grain. But artists used to provoke this all the time. I mean, Frank Zappa understood music like no one. Go listen to Inca Roads and listen to a man approach his medium with complete ingenuity that would rival any classically trained musician. But Zappa made a career of not taking himself seriously. So then you have a collection of musical virtuosos making this. And also making this. All of this could be summarised in a death of counterculture. At some point, the complete commodification of all things cool completely absorbed any kind of rational dissent. You know, the kind that was embodied in the punk movement. Not to side with the company men that tell you how to act. People like Tom York have been talking about this commodification into content for over a decade now. But there used to be space for this kind of discourse. Now there's an absolutism in people's reactions to the arts. You're either with us or you're against us. You're either all in what we believe or you're exiled. When did everything become so fucking embarrassing? What, you can't call out something that you like? Okay, well, I'll begin. One of my biggest struggles to engage with the art world of now, in any form, is precisely because of how corporate it all became. I don't take any sponsorships because I think that people see enough advertisements in their day-to-day life. You turn on the television and there's an advert. People go on social media, it's someone hawking a product. A bus drives past, promoting a new, useless subscription service. This is bad enough. And then the celebrities and the artists that people love do the same thing. But there used to be a counterculture very present in which artists would call out these normalized mainstream behaviors.
Cut the commercial, buy the Acura, buy the Colgate. If you have bad breath, they're not going to talk to you. If you got pimples, the girl's not going to fuck you. And it's just this, it's a campaign of fear and consumption.
Bill Hicks was remembered and lauded for maintaining that abrasive nature and calling out people by name in the most horrific manner imaginable.
Don't ever want to make you cry, don't ever want to make you sigh. I love you, don't ever want to break your heart. Couldn't break any woman's heart, you have no dick. You have a little corn nut, you have no balls, you're a eunuch, you're a Nazi demon from hell, and I hate you. I hate your parents, I hate everything about you.
He was upheld by alternative culture as an anti-corporate, anti-authoritarian dark poet. And yet now, we've become so protective of these charlatans, the very people and actions Bill Hicks was calling out.
Let me tell you something right now, and you can print this in stone, and don't you ever forget it. Any performer that ever sells a product on television is for now and all eternity removed from the artistic world. I don't care if you shit Mona Lisas out of your ass on cue. You've made your fucking choice.
We now aspire to hold hands with corporations, and we don't care when artists secretly benefit from an awful system. Because the era of entertainment addiction makes us look at celebrities with an increasingly ravenous, iconic status that they become basically infallible. God forbid I come on here to say that Taylor Swift is nothing more than a hollow corporate vessel, that she's a spawn of some company man whose agenda is to shill mediocrity across the face of the globe as a unifying language, like some form of Esperanto, and that way she can hawk Diet Cokes until her last breath because that's what she loves. She loves being a company girl. And fuck it, she can do a collaboration with Beyonce, who writes jingles to sell me fucking pants now. But you know, I'd never say that, especially being part of an alternative, more in-the-know subculture. Do you think I enjoy seeing people I like sell their souls for money? I will sit here blowing Martin Scorsese as one of the great American filmmakers, but do we really need him to be making adverts for American Express? Does Travis Scott need to be partnering with McDonald's or Kendrick Lamar with Tiffany to make their art more impactful? Why are all these millionaires selling you fucking insurance and clothes? What, they don't have enough money? And as soon as anyone calls out the actions of great artists for doing this stuff, and many of them are great artists, all of a sudden, it's as though they're exempt from it. We can't call out Harry Styles for sucking corporate cock to make an Apple advert. He just really believes in the product. No, I've been listening to Bad Brains and refused for too fucking long to have this milquetoast corporate shit become the norm. Call out the artists that you like that charge you up the arse to see them perform. Talk shit about them when they want to speak against the same system that pays them millions to advertise for a fucking cash app. Get real. Fuck the script, that was done long ago now. It's easy to call out Kiss for doing a Walmart chant, but stop with the low-hanging fruit. If you want the world to be a better place, if you want your artists and your inspirations to do better, then hold them accountable for the greedy shit that they do. I turned down fucking Surfshark sponsorships for way less than that. But all this, it's in the same boat as what I was saying earlier. When you don't have an edge, you don't get it, and then you become too scared to call out anyone, because odds are you'll fall out with that camp and you're left uncategorizable. Because when you expose yourself to humanity's totality, you have an understanding of it. That doesn't mean dwell in it. It means understand it exists so you may adequately traverse through it. I wrote an essay, The Allure of the New Profane, about a year ago. Go read it, it's alright. And I spoke of the dangers of a culture of desensitization to extreme content. However, I also think that a degree of extreme content is necessary. And it's amazing because so much of this trepidation and finding an enemy is an internet issue. And it says to me that these bastions of alternative media don't even fully get the medium which they almost exclusively operate in. We've spoken of image literacy before, but the internet at one point was a subculture that mainstream culture didn't completely intersect with. But now it's inseparable from mainstream culture. And so the mainstream is here via necessity, not by choice, which means that many have not fully developed internet literacy. There are many people that think the worst thing on the internet is the new problematic influencer. They don't know about Diaper Andy or Snake Thing. Most of them don't even know about Christian. Yet they'll believe that they understand the depravities of the internet and thus the depths of mankind. That's my issue. People miss out on so many things they don't know they don't know. Have you seen the film Promising Young Woman? Because that's the kind of art that's made when someone doesn't get it. You want to make a film that's a bit of a social shaking of the feathers, but you don't get the thing you're talking about. You want to show how dangerous lonely men can be, and yet the portrayal of them is so actually out of touch. It's clear to me that the filmmaker has no real understanding of the legitimate danger of the lowbrow culture, if you can call it that, of inceldom. People need exposure to some degree of extremity, and that's up to people to decide how. This insincerity and lack of edge and conformity leads to these misunderstandings, and it makes itself so glaringly obvious to the people in the know. And it's unfortunate to say that most people sadly aren't. The issue thus becomes, how can you tell what's permitted and what's not? How can something work when the almost exact same thing wouldn't for someone else? It's all about context, and that becomes richer with any form of literacy. Odd Nerdrum, perhaps the world's greatest living painter, painted this controversial piece in the 80s, titled Twilight, of a woman defecating in the woods. Now, there are works of art that deal with human excrement that don't have the depth or brutal humanism that shines through with this piece. But again, it's not about finding the dignity in humanity that's the exclusive purpose of art, because then we need only go back to Sarlo to find another work that deals with the same stuff, but that's about dehumanization. It's context, and it often can't be explained in words about why it works, because it requires a long time of study and passion. I can trace this all the way back to the Canterbury Tales, a fictionalized collection of stories from pilgrims on their way to Canterbury Cathedral, telling their tales to one another as a competition. It's the bedrock of English prose, and yet its perspective is one of complete representation. In an era where we've become obsessed with the word, we need only look back to the 14th century to find a work that utterly exemplifies it. Each storyteller is in essence an archetype of medieval England, from the valiant knight to a monk, a nun, a squire. Every class and creed was covered in the Canterbury Tales, and all of their stories are told earnestly from their perspective. The lower classes' stories are told more crassly, often with crude humour. The upper classes tell regal poetry and stories that hold deep meaning, but all are represented with sincerity. No one's perspective is seen as lesser because they're all offering something, and the piece as a whole is more complete for it. A human being cannot disregard that which they're not a part of. They have to understand it, and if possible, embrace it, so that they too can inhabit this ongoing universal tale. It's funny because there's an idea that we don't understand contemporary art. Although Louisa, my wife, her mother is a contemporary artist. She spent a large portion of her life at vernissages. She went to an alternative school in Brazil that pledged allegiance to Che Guevara. She understands that world. And even when a minority wanted to believe that on discussing painter Aleksandra Walecewska's work that her perspective was wrong, they didn't know that my wife has direct correspondence with Walecewska herself and has spoken in admiration of one another's work. One of my more recent obsessions is with BLP Kosher, and it's funny, Kosher is so of now, and yet I can't get enough of his wordplay and double entendres. He uses the contemporary style and image of rap, but with the elements of what made it successful decades prior. His world is one of pop culture that spans decades, but then references Robert Frost and skate culture. It's why when Old Dirty Bastard starts rapping about keeping shit stains in his drawers, it works even better because then he's dropping bars about Jacques Cousteau. I suppose a large portion of this can be summarised by virtuosity, and I don't like when there's an undeniable technical brilliance to someone that's refuted because of some personal misgivings. But what was the point of all this? I mean, ultimately, what I want is for people to become less afraid of delving into that which they don't know, or that which is deemed wrong by whatever camp they find themselves in. For there has to be more crossover between what are thus far non-intersectioning demographics without things falling to shit. I want people to be able to express whatever the fuck they want, but on a more well-informed basis. I'm tired of seeing people be duped by corporate sponsors and celebrity and influencer culture or their favourite internet sock puppets. I suppose really, I want people to be a bit stronger and let their best attributes shine. One of the best aspects of the traditional arts was that they were often antithetical to modern culture. They rejected it. Art was so often a form of rebellion, and we shouldn't forget that. You can become so preoccupied with modernity that you have blinders on to the beauty of the world around you. I don't think that humanity is dissipated solely because people rarely venture into places that they feel uncomfortable, but because there's no complete understanding of the totality of the human experience. I don't just want a world in which all art is exalted. I want things that are dangerous, that are disgusting, that are scary. But the idea that's so commonly perpetuated is that to call out for standards means that you decry all of these things also. Things can also be dark and vile and violent and rude. But not everything of that is good, just as not every piece that wants to be transcendental is. But too often is either side disregarded by its opposite. No one dares to go outside of their box and yet forever claims the counterculture. And will never be able to reach the promised land if this unpunkness continues. We all need to do better, and that includes us. It's why I made this video. The world needs a shift, a less internet-based world, a braver world. There is a point that we have to leave certain things behind if we are to move forward. So the next time you see us, we will no longer be the cinematography, because things must grow. But I promise you, we will always be standing on the side of humanity. We're not going anywhere, but now the time has come to take things that step further. You and I. Stay punk, everybody.